Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights. Welcome back, everybody. I get up in the morning and, I just want to have the best day ever of my life. I just want each day to be a little bit better than the next, than the day before. Just keep, the rhythm going that I keep building on better and better days. And I like to see really cool stuff happen in my lifetime and see people really coming together and doing things. Well, one of the things is I believe in customer experience and customer service, where your customer service has to enhance that customer experience. Make that customer feel like, hey, I really got waited on, and that they feel comfortable with your business and how your business actually operates. Well, in the next story, we're going to be talking about a Krispy Kreme, and one that is actually kind of local to where my office is. And there's probably some controversy around actually Krispy Kreme because, hey, they took a small shop small donut shop that was developed in Georgia, and it eventually becomes this huge corporate conglomerate sort of thing. And how we talk about corporate greed and things like that. But I don't want you to focus on who they are, on Krispy Kreme as a corporation. I want you to focus on Krispy Kreme as this local donut shop and what happened. So here goes the story. This morning, I got up and I had an appointment to go get the family vehicle serviced, and drove it up there, had conversations, and talked to my niece about what's going on in her life and how, hey, maybe her uncle can help her out with a couple of things. Truck was done within a half hour. Paid the bill, jumped in the truck, and had a craving for apple fritters. And I clicked the Bluetooth on the truck and call my wife, and I say, hey, would you like some Krispy Kremes today? Where I can loop back around again, and I can go over to Krispy Kremes and get some apple fritters. Would you like some? And she says yes, she would love to have some apple fritters, because it was still early enough in the morning that we hadn't actually had breakfast yet. So loop around, go over to the Krispy Kreme, and because of the time of the day, the place is pretty much so empty. I'm the only customer in there. So I go in and I order 6 apple fritters. And at first, the young lady behind the counter, she didn't hear me right, and she thought I needed to still pick out my donuts. I said no. I leaned in a little closer, and I said, no, I wanted 6 apple fritters, please. And she went to work on it, and I noticed right off that she was a new employee. And I said to the girl who was standing at the register, I said, she's new. It's like one of her first days. And she said, yes. I said, this is cool because we all get to be new sometime. And it's a new experience. Hey, I'm helping a customer, and she was so eager and happy to do so. Which a lot of times that my wife and I, we talk about how new newcomers to the workplace aren't always so happy to serve serve people. They think that there is some kind of entitlement that they should have, and they don't always just kind of jump in there and want to help people. So this young lady was really eager to be able to help people and to jump in there and actually, grab these 6 apple fritters. I mean, it's small, but it's big at the same time. So I pay the bill, and I'm waiting for the apple fritters to come. And I noticed that by this time, the manager of the shop, or the shift manager, had showed up and was helping out the other young lady who was ringing me out with the whole transaction to make sure that it was done right. Because, hey, she appeared to be kind of new on the register. And the other young lady, putting the apple fritters into the box, she was having a little struggle with the box and everything, and the manager reached over and started helping her. She didn't get pushy about it. She just offered some guidance. And I noticed that the box changed. That the manager went and grabbed a new box, and she tossed the other box away. Okay, so climate change and all that kind of stuff, we can't just throw away paper, right? But hey, let's just go with the idea that she's making sure that as she's training her employees, or the employees that are directly underneath of her, that they do quality work and that they put their best foot forward. So I get the box of donuts and the 6 apple fritters, and I say to the manager, hey, that was really cool what you actually just did. It's like you helped her learn how to put the best donuts forward. And with that, the manager said to me that the box was a little crumpled, and she said, hey, and it's not like we're in a rush or anything like that, and which was true. I wasn't in a rush. It's like, hey, I was just grabbing something to head on back to my home office and enjoy a little breakfast with my wife, right? So no real rush. Had lots of time before appointments and start recording. Hey, great stories, right? Okay, so I said to her, it's really cool to see people actually teaching people to take their time and to put their best out there. And that you didn't get pushy about it. You actually offered guidance, and you still allowed her to actually put the apple fritters or donuts themselves in the box herself, and you just walked her through the process so that she could close the box up, and the box looked like a Krispy Kreme box. It didn't look crumpled or anything like it. It was the perfect Krispy Kreme box that everybody would know and see whenever you walk out of their shop. So it's really cool to see people actually not get pushy about things, but make sure that they're guiding people to do their best. Guiding people so that they will always shine. And that's the whole point of the story. Is how do we help people shine? How do we help them put their best foot forward? How do we help them feel dignified in everything that they do? It's something that we all need to work for and work towards so that we can always help people put their best foot forward. So, depending on where you're actually finding this story, if you're finding it as part of a podcast on policy and rights or on inspiring stories, that depending on how you find it, find a way to make a comment and leave a comment. If you're finding it as a blog post or as a LinkedIn post or something like that, hey, it's pretty obvious. Just click below and please do put a comment. What you think is great customer service and how you can help others people shine just because you're serving. Hey, thanks a lot for listening. And hey, let's get back to whatever the regular programming would be. So, our next segment, we're going to hear Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta, as she is discussing what the fossil fuel energy is trying to do to help climate change. She's going to talk to you about different ways that the carbon that is produced through fossil fuels, that it can be captured, and once it is captured, especially the CO2, once it's captured, it can be used to strengthen things like rebar. It can be used to strengthen concrete, and there's a lot of uses for it. And she wants to discuss those uses as well as the capture of that carbon, and in the form of CO2. She's also going to talk about things like fuel cells, hydrogen fuel cells, and she's talking about building cars with hydrogen fuel cells, which may be a little more viable than some of the things that we're hearing about. How in the Congo, where they are actually mining a lot of lithium, and how the uprisings in Central Africa are affecting that mining, and what is actually going on that is causing these uprisings. What are the mining companies doing or not doing for the people in those areas that are causing uprisings, and people that want to, they are not only speaking out, but they are shooting out against what these mining companies are doing. A lot of people aren't talking about it's that people are trying to rebel against the mining companies. They're just saying that they're rebelling against the government. But in a lot of respects, maybe the government is taking the money from the mining companies and not giving back to the people. So, why don't we listen to what Danielle Smith has to say, and some of her rebuttals against the environmental minister that who was also at this particular conference and had an opportunity to speak. So, why don't we move on and let's listen to what Danielle Smith had to say at this fossil fuel conference.
I'll just be very brief. Thanks for that, Sam. I'm just so delighted to be part of the delegation welcoming the world to Alberta. I think this is a really exciting conference, an exciting theme about how to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. I found already with many of the speakers, although not all, that we are very much in sync with the pathway and with some of the new innovations that are going to happen to get there. Had a fantastic opportunity to tour the Saudi Arabian pavilion and look at all of the amazing new developments that they have on how to capture and sequester CO2 and turn it into useful products. So I think you're going to see a race between Alberta and some of these other jurisdictions to make sure we can adopt the same technologies. And as I mentioned in my speech last night, And I think this bears repeating over and over again, that this whole enterprise we've started on is a pathway to reduce emissions. We are transitioning away from emissions. We're not transitioning away from oil and natural gas. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, if you guys prefer to sit down, we can also raise hands. I'll go with you, Sean, as well first.
Sean Polzer, Western Standard. I don't know if you sat in on Mr. Nasser's presentation this morning.
I did.
And he was talking about potentially dangerous energy transition. And I'm wondering what some of your thoughts were and maybe how it applies here.
Well, I think that what I liked about what he had to say was talking about how we have to make sure that as we're transitioning, we're also keeping an eye on affordability and reliability. I mean, we have a lot of disruption that happens in the world when people feel economically insecure. And so I think he was just commenting on some of the things that we've seen in the past, and that you have to build out the new energy system at the same time as maintaining the existing energy system so that you have that continuity. And I think he's very pragmatic. I think it's very much along the lines of what we would like to see. Having an aggressive target of getting to 2050, that is aggressive. And it doesn't mean that you can't have milestones along the way, but I think his caution was to make sure that we put people first and that we care about people and that we're very mindful of energy poverty and the kind of turmoil that can cause if we're not mindful of that. And I agree with him.
And with respect to your remarks at the opening ceremony yesterday about we don't want to be like Germany, can you expand on that?
I was just, someone just shared with me another story today about how Germany is turning a wind farm, decommissioning a wind farm so that they can recommission a coal plant. And that's what happens when you end up making a decision to move faster than the technology is able to keep up. Energy security and affordability is the imperative of governments to make sure that they can maintain. And what we don't want to see is that because we're looking for a perfect solution, that we're not looking at what the transition needs to be. And the transition has to involve LNG, has to involve natural gas. We can continue to work towards better and better carbon capture technology. But when I talk to those who are looking for that transition and looking for Canada to play a role in exporting LNG, they're very clear with me that if we don't do our part and they can't get that secure supply of natural gas, they're going to recommission coal plants. And if that happens, that increases global emissions. And I think that that moves us backwards. So we don't want to be in the position that Germany is, where they have to take a U-turn because they didn't end up with the reliability and affordability being front and center.
Very much. So I don't want to jump from the cameras there, sorry. But just on the emissions cap, obviously that's something that's very much front and centre here. What does Alberta want to see at that? You know, Wilkinson's saying we'll probably have something by the end of the year. What do those negotiations look like as far as you're concerned?
Well, we have an 8 to 12 month time frame, and I don't want to prejudge what the outcome would be. I mean, keep in mind, we already do have an emissions cap in Alberta on oil sands. It's 100 megatons. And it was a generous cap because I think there was a recognition that the industry was going to keep on working on reducing emissions. I mean, if we're all working towards carbon neutrality by 2050, my view is we don't actually need an emissions cap. My view is that we should be working towards carbon neutrality by 2050 and figuring out what those abatement curves look like for each industry. Some industries are going to get there faster than others. And putting arbitrary targets in place before talking to industry and doing that modeling, that seems to be a bit premature. So I'm hopeful that we don't see, and I've said this to our federal counterparts, is they keep on threatening things like the clean electricity regs, having those implemented, the oil and natural gas emissions cap, a methane target that is aggressive. Those are all things that have to be negotiated. And if they were to come through with those policies while we're at the table, we would look at that as a negotiating in bad faith. And we don't want that.
And just one of my colleagues sent me a question on E. coli, whether or not you'll commit to a public inquiry, and why do you think Preston Manning is the appropriate person to oversee any kind of review of the Public Health Act, given his anti-science background with no public health experience?
Well, a couple things. Yes, I have committed to do a review. I'm not quite sure what form that will take just yet. I want to make sure that we've gotten through the worst of the crisis. I'm very relieved to see that the number of hospitalizations have gone down from 12 to 9, and the number of kids on dialysis has gone down from 4 to 3, and the cases appear to be stabilizing. I believe we're at 348 today. So we're at a point very soon where we'll be able to shift into looking at that review. So yes, I have committed to that, and we will do one. I had asked Preston Manning to look at the full range of legal changes that might be necessary in looking at what the next pandemic response should be. And so Public Health Act is one part of it, but there's, I think, about 7 or 8 other pieces of legislation that he is looking at.
Good morning, good afternoon, Premier. You often talk about how, Alberta is advancing its position on oil and gas, and, things are going not that badly. But oftentimes, Albertans and Canadians see that there's a lot of evidence, perhaps to the contrary, that keeps arising, whether it's comments made by the Minister for Climate Change, or in the case of the Minister of Natural Resources, comments he made last night, which you definitely very strongly took objection to. So where are we really at when, on the one hand, you are saying you're bargaining in good faith, negotiating in good faith, everything's, we're going to try to get things ironed out, and incessantly we keep on getting these disagreements along the way as to what's actually happening and where it's all going to end up.
Where I think we agree is carbon neutrality by 2050. Where we disagree is what the milestone should be along the way. And, I appreciate that there does need to be some demonstration that we're moving in the right direction. I think we have demonstrated that. The conversion from coal to natural gas resulted in, I think it was 22 megatons of emissions reduction. The aggressive targets that we set to reduce methane emissions, we've achieved that target of 45% emissions reduction. So we've also been the first to put carbon pricing on industrial emissions. That was done back in 2007. We also have at-scale projects for carbon capture, utilization, and storage that are working. We've got the carbon trunk line. We've got major industrial players that are talking about their pathway to get to net zero. So I feel like we are demonstrating that we are taking those steps. And it's a matter, I think, of getting the federal government to acknowledge that that's progress. And there's just certain things we have to work with the federal government on. I know that the Prime Minister is very keen on the issue of small modular nuclear. And I'm keen to work with him on that too, but we've never had nuclear in this province. And so that requires broad-based consultation. It requires figuring out the regulatory pathway for that. Most of the existing sites were approved with an environmental permit decades ago, and the world has changed quite a bit. So we can move as fast as they can move, as long as we have some, as long as we're in sync on wanting to get the regulations streamlined. But we recognize we have to make progress. I think if we're focused on 2050, and then if we can get the regulations in sync, I think we'll be able to carve out those abatement curves and come to an agreement.
If you can't get those regulations in sync, and that's a hypothetical, but given the evidence, it could be a stronger than weaker hypothetical. Is your government, you've made comments in the past, including I remember at the after the meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau at the Stampede, are you going to stand firm in Alberta's position on the 2035 and on the emissions cap? And secondarily, do you think it's helpful, the comments that are coming out of federal cabinet ministers, sort of both of those then?
I don't know if anyone was in the room last night, but lead balloon might describe the way the energy ministers or the natural resources ministers' comments went over. To come to a major energy conference, an international energy conference with people from all different backgrounds, many of them facing energy poverty in their own countries, and talking to producers about the ludicrous IEA projections that we're only going to have 25 million barrels of oil per day produced in 2050. I mean, it was a bit of a slap in the face, let's be frank about that. And that's why I had to indicate that I don't believe that those projections are accurate. I was pleased to see, actually, that the head of Saudi Aramco also said the same thing, that the company, or the IEA, has turned from being an entity that does predictions to being one that engages in political advocacy. And that isn't, I don't think that that's very helpful to the discussion. So my view is that we have an obligation to address issues of energy poverty, and that includes in our own province. when I hear and see what happens to our seniors and our vulnerable and our fixed income individuals in January, February, March, when you have not only a spike in home heating prices, but a spike in power prices, we can't allow that to continue. We've looked at the numbers, and if we were to just allow for the natural capital turnover, it would be $92 billion by 2050. If we were trying to compress that, not only would it cost that $92 billion, it would have cost an additional $52 billion to be able to achieve that goal within the next 13 years. And that could be anywhere from 2 to 5 times increasing the cost of electricity. That's just not affordable, not attainable. And we should be mindful that when you end up with that kind of hardship that you're putting on our most vulnerable citizens, there's going to be a backlash. So if we can avoid that, have a longer time frame, allow for the technology to develop, that seems to me to be the right pathway. So yes, we're going to stand firm. We cannot do net zero power grid by 2035. We think we can by 2050. Some of our producers say it can be done by 2045. So there might be some room for negotiation and discussion there, but we have to have every one of our decisions based in reality.
The emissions cap.
And the emissions cap, again, as I mentioned, we already have an emissions cap on the oil sands, and the oil sands have responded to that. They have a pathway to be net zero by 2050 as well. Dow Chemical is going to have a petrochemical plant. When they get to final investment decision, that's net zero. Air Products is net zero hydrogen. Heidelberg is going to have the first net zero cement plant in the world as well. And when you hear with cement being the second most used commodity behind water in the world, that's significant to be able to have that kind of engineering and pioneering innovation happening in Alberta. That's what we should be celebrating.
And we're going to go to Chris next, and while he's asking his question, can I just get hands up for those questions as well?
Premier, you mentioned here that you obviously had a disagreement with Minister Wilkinson's speech, but what specifically did you disagree with? Why did you say, or why are you describing it as a bit of a slap in the face?
Well, I can tell you the number of people who walked up to me after he had spoken to see if I had steam coming out of my ears. That was one indication. I can tell you my cabinet was very unhappy with the comments that were made. And members of council were unhappy with the comments that were made as well, because I think what he was tone deaf to is the amount of work that's been done by our industry to align with the carbon neutral target, and to essentially act as if the industry was winding down. And that is not the case. That's why I had to counter his message. This is not an industry that's winding down. It's an industry that's transitioning away from emissions. And the fact that we saw other speakers talking about in the same terms suggests to me that it was Minister Wilkinson who was offside on it.
Just to follow up, and this is a bit of a two-parter, but forgiveness here, but can you tell me, is this really the appropriate place on an international stage for the federal government and the provincial governments to be cues in energy policy? So that's my first question. The second one is, I heard that you had a conversation with the Saudi energy minister. Can I ask you what you discussed and what the common ground is with his country?
Well, I don't like to fight with my federal counterparts, but I'm not going to allow them to take swipes at our industry and have it go unanswered. And talking about this industry winding down, being on its last legs, only having 25 million barrels a day of production by 2050, at a time when everybody's here to celebrate production and investment, and we're trying to make Canada an investment magnet, I would say that was the wrong place for him to make that speech. And I had to give people some optimism and enthusiasm that we are going to be able to work together to get to common targets. So I think I had to counter his comments, because I think he left a pretty, I think the room was pretty gloomy after he spoke, and I don't think there's anything to be gloomy about at all with this industry. I did speak to the Saudi energy minister. I had a chance to meet him this morning when he flew in, and we've had, one of the things that I noticed about the pavilion is they're being very progressive on what they can do with captured CO2 to turn it into useful products. They have a product, I would encourage all of you to go over there, because they're using the CO2 to create a product that can be a replacement for rebar. They have a number of different plastic pipes that they can use. They're doing CO2 embedded in cement to be able to make stronger concrete. And they're also got a combustion engine hydrogen vehicle that they're working on as well. So I feel like we're going to be in a bit of a technological and innovation race with Saudi Arabia. And I think we heard that from the energy minister this morning. He intends to lead the world in this, and he is challenging the rest of us to keep up. And Alberta wants to keep up. So I think that there's going to be a lot of information sharing as we move towards a carbon neutral target.
Go to our front left here first. Yes.
Yeah, I know this kind of relates to the industry and the federal government, but there's like a lot of negotiation right now going on regarding the degree of tax credit subsidies for carbon capture. But we're hearing that that they've got to get this thing going by the beginning of the year, where they're not even going to meet their own targets. I'm wondering, is the province doing anything? What are you doing to try to hurry this along or do something?
Well, I have mentioned that we're working on our own credit for carbon capture utilization and storage, similar, but structured perhaps a little bit differently than our Alberta Petrochemical Incentive Program. And I want to be able to announce what the details of that are when I go to Dubai for COP28. So we accept that timeline is accelerated, and we're hoping that the federal government will be able to match us so that we can make a joint announcement together in Dubai.
Next year.
No, this year.
This year, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, that's going to be, I'll be traveling there November 30th, so it's the first week of December, I'll be there.
Go to our far left side of the room here. Yeah.
Premier, there are plenty of other forecasters in the IEA who are calling peak oil demand in the next 5 to 10 years. What if you're wrong? Is there a plan B?
Well, I guess the way I look at it is, I like what the energy minister had to say, the Saudi energy minister had to say this morning. You've got to live in the real world, not on computer models. And he actually challenged the group to find a single time that the IEA has had a single projection that has been correct. So I think it takes a leap of faith to think that if they've never been correct, that they will be correct by 2050. We've got to respond to the world as it is, and I think he also was being quite responsible in saying that's part of the reason why they already did a production cut, is that there were predictions last year about how China was just going to race ahead once the COVID restrictions were lifted. Well, it turned out not to be the case. And his advice was, you take a measure of prudence so that you don't end up creating disruption and instability in the markets, and then you can always increase. And so I think that that kind of approach actually is a lot more practical than trying to rely on predictions from what has become increasingly, unfortunately, a political activist organization.
And follow up as well? Yeah.
Sinopec just the other day called for peak gasoline demand in China at the end of this year, peak diesel demand at the end of 2025. We've got Bloomberg NEF calling for peak road transport demand by 2026. It's global. It's not just the IEA. And you've got the Chamber of Commerce here in Calgary saying that the energy transition is an existential crisis for the Alberta oil and gas industry. Are you listening to other voices?
I would say one of the things I'm encouraged by is the same thing that the Saudi energy minister is encouraged by, all the ways in which you can use the product for different ends. I mean, they're talking about right now having 2 million barrels a day being used for alternative products, including lubricants, petrochemicals, and construction materials. And they're anticipating that's a double. So they're anticipating that as the amount of gasoline and diesel demand declines, they'll just replace that with non-combustion uses of their product. And we should be taking the same attitude as well. If we can use natural gas and oil to be able to create construction materials, harder cement, replacement for rebar, why wouldn't we do that? That's how I'm looking at it, is that we're not going to phase out production of oil and natural gas. We're just going to change the way in which we use it. In our province, hydrogen is very likely going to be an increasingly important fuel that comes from natural gas as its base. Carbon capture, utilization, and storage will be able to assist in that development. And that's where I think we're going to end up going here. Hydrogen is also possible to be used for power plants. I think that's going to be a positive use also. And when you look at the supply for asphalt, I mean, I've seen some projections that we have the potential to increase our bitumen for use as asphalt up to 5 million barrels per day. So whether you're driving a combustion engine vehicle or a hydrogen combustion engine vehicle or a fuel cell vehicle or an EV, you're going to need roads to drive on. So those are the things that I'm looking at, is I don't think that the need for our products is going to diminish. I just think it's going to change.
And we'll go to the collective back here.
Colette Norris, Canadian Press. Just back to the E. coli outbreak. We now have about 7 other facilities that have been either closed or partially closed due to this outbreak. What do you know about that so far in terms of how they relate to these other cases? And I'll just ask my second question as well. How does the provincial program to give a one-time reimbursement apply to those parents?
There's a couple of things I'd say. The secondary closures are related to having children interacting with each other. So all of them, as I understand it, have had some close contact with a child who was impacted or affected, or it was a child who was at one of the original facilities who got moved into one of the new facilities. So that's why we're telling parents is just make sure that you keep your kids at home if they're sick, and make sure that you go through the process of getting the clearance before having them return. I think we're now at 642 kids who are cleared to return. And so we'll go through that process. We'll have a lot more who are cleared to return in the coming weeks. The one-time payment was designed to be for those first 11 schools, daycares, because the trauma for those parents, the disruption for those parents, the financial hardship for those parents, and the lack of confidence some of those parents have in returning their kids to school, we wanted to make sure that all of that had a payment so that they could make the choices that is right for their family. At the moment, we haven't extended it to the partial closures on the other facilities. We are hopeful that those will be reopened very quickly. And so I understand the health minister will have more to say on that on Wednesday.
Thanks.
And we'll give you next again.
Hi, Mia Williams from Reuters. You said that if the federal government introduced the clean electricity standards during negotiations, that would be seen as a bad faith tactic. So how would the province respond? Would the idea of the CCUS tax credits go out the window? What would the next step be?
I'm going to be hopeful that they have heard my message loud and clear, not to bring any permanent changes through until we get to the end of the negotiations. We have a really good relationship with many of the ministers, and I think everybody is coming to the conclusion that having this negotiation in public is not serving the interests of either of our governments, and it's not serving the interests of industry. So I'm hoping we can bring the temperature down. I don't want to escalate it any further. I'm looking for the federal government to be measured in the comments that they make and optimistic in the comments that they make, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But you know, we've got a lot of mechanisms that we can use in order to be able to defend our constitutional right to develop our resources in our own way, not have the federal government put in production caps. Electricity is also an area that is provincial jurisdiction, exclusive provincial jurisdiction, and we intend to vigorously defend our constitutional rights.
We'll go to you, Sarah.
Sarah Hoffman with Global News. I just wanted to ask, we have a hearing underway right now elsewhere in Calgary, TMX hearing, as they look at potentially additional costs, additional delays to this project. It was under $5 billion when the federal government first purchased it. Now looking at over $30 billion. What kind of precedent does this set for other, oil companies or other investors that are looking at putting pipelines into our province?
Well, the reason TMX ended up with a federal owner is because it needed to be de-risked. It was not going to go ahead without a federal partner. And I suppose once this is complete, we'll all learn from why it is it escalated so much. I'm just hopeful that it gets to the finish line before the end of next year, because it's still a viable project. It is still going to be a profitable project for all levels of government, and there's a really great opportunity for Indigenous partners to have an ownership stake and create a new revenue stream. So I'm really hopeful that they managed to figure out the routing issue. I know that it's complicated. Could add, I think I read up to 9 months more to the process. So from what I've seen, the federal government is very keen to get it finished. They are now invested so much in this. They want to have it complete so that they can move it back into the private sector as quickly as possible. And we'll be prepared to assist on that. We already have our Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation on standby waiting to see if there's some way that we can assist in helping Indigenous communities take an ownership stake. So that work is already beginning. But once it gets into operation, we'll be able to kick in and provide some support to get that transition.
Another big story, of course, in the headlines. The Calgary City Council has approved its housing strategy over the weekend. Several recommendations involve the province on things like rent control, tax breaks for nonprofit affordable housing providers. What can Calgarians expect from the province now that the strategy is approved, and how open is the province to some of the ideas in this plan?
Well, I can say we're not going to do rent control. We know that that is the exact opposite of what we need to do. If you're trying to convince more developers to invest more money into building more rental housing, and then saying your reward for that will be that government will step in at any point and limit the amount you can charge, is going to have the exact opposite effect. So I know that it's seen to be a nice, quick solution, but it actually creates more long-term problems. What we need is to increase supply. We are prepared to give more rent supplement programs. So we did add an additional 1,500 Alberta households to our rent supplement program, so there's a total of 12,500. Happy to work with Jason Nixon, our minister, to see if more needs to be done there. Last week we announced $16 million to bring back affordable housing units for use across the province, and that's on top of $94 million we announced in budget 2023. We also have $9 billion with our partners over the next 10 years to build 25,000 new units by 2031. But what I'm really most interested, so that I think on the affordable side, I think that's there's lots that we can do to work with our municipal counterparts. What I am interested, though, is that the strategy also includes 80 recommendations to reduce barriers to home building. And so attainable housing is just as important as affordable housing. You need to have young people know that aspirationally they're going to be able to buy a house. And so if that involves identifying provincial lands or provincial buildings that can be repurposed in the same way that municipal government is doing that, I think they've asked us to give a property tax reprieve for a period of time on new construction. I'm open-minded in looking at that. We also need to streamline the permitting process, though, too. I mean, there are some jurisdictions that are doing a great job on this. St. Albert, they proudly talk about how they can do same-day business license, 3-day development permits, and 3-week building permits. That's setting the kind of pace that I think we need to see from all municipalities about how urgent this is, that they clear away the barriers to construction. We also have an obligation to make sure that there are enough workers in this field as well. So I've met with the building trades to see what we can do to collaborate on introducing young people to the building trade sooner. And so if we can come to some agreement on how we might be able to accelerate that, I think that's going to address it too.
We just have time for one last question. We're just going to go to her back right here.
Premier, your comments yesterday or your speech, you talked about prioritizing and the importance of ethical production. I'm just wondering, given the ribbon cutting that just took place with your Saudi counterparts, their human rights violations are often well documented and questioned. Just how you justify that relationship.
One of the things that I think is important is to focus on the things that we agree on. And as the energy minister said, we agree on 85% of the direction that we need to go. We're welcoming people from all around the world, from a bunch of different backgrounds, but we're all here with the same purpose. We know that we have to deal with emissions in an urgent basis, but we also have to make sure that we're dealing with reliability and affordability and energy security. And so if we can work together on those, I know that the federal government is working on trying to reestablish a relationship with our Saudi counterparts after 5 years of distance, and so we want to be supportive of trying to move in that direction. So we tend to try to focus on the areas where we can agree.
Thank you. And did you have a follow-up? That's all.
That's all.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. please contact us at depictions.media for more information.